All right, so of course we are focusing on the business of art here on Point this afternoon. And this time around, I thought we'd just touch on just how the numbers look across the globe. And of course here locally as well. Some of these stats do of course come from Art Tactic and UBS as well, having researched and delivered some artwork. So where exactly is the biggest art market in the world? And of course, unfamiliar to everyone else, it's the big United States. So let's take a look at this graphic now and just see where the world sits. And gold sitting at the top of the mark there, $29.9 billion US worth of sales in art coming through from the United States just last year alone. And that's from a total market, of course, where the global art sales are up 6% to 67.4 billion rand. You're finding that the second place then, as you can see by that silver mark there, 14 billion rand out in the United Kingdom. And that is despite issues of Brexit, of course. And more surety on that will certainly change things along for Brexit in itself. China out there sitting at 12.9 billion. That's actually a drop of around 3.3%. So Africa is expected to have some positive developments in 2019, and that's according to 47% of experts. So that's certainly some good news for South Africa. Now, or for Africa, shall I say. Now, if we continue to take a look at just how things fare, it is beginning to click into gear. Online sales, when it comes to art, has certainly picked up. That's gone up 9% of global sales now. That's a new high of $6 billion US worth of art market sales happening online. So that is clearly helping the market. Taking a look then at millennials and how they're faring as well. Onto the next graph as well, you'll begin to see that they make up a high number as well. 45% of the high-end spenders in art were millennials, and those are, of course, people born between 1980 and 2000, people like myself, but I don't think I'm part of those high net spenders. However, 46% of art collectors as well were millennials just in Singapore, and they occupied the biggest part of that millennial market. Very quickly as well, headed off onto our next graph here, and this just speaks about how the art fairs and public auctions continue to be a huge selling point and continue to be a market that everybody still wants to get into. $16.5 billion in 2018 brought in through art fairs, while public auction sales rose 3% year on year to $29.1 billion as well. So big markets there, big numbers, and Africa certainly could be at the forefront of this moving into the rest of 2019. Nzinga.
Thanks, Arabile. The people who make art need collectors, galleries and more to have their work seen, bought and distributed. I'm joined in studio by Setlamorago Mashilo, who is an award-winning artist, and Nwabisa Xayiya, who's an art collector. Thanks both so much for your time on SABC News. Perhaps I'll start with you. Being an artist isn't just about creating. You also need to manage your work and manage yourself to ensure that you're out there.
I mean, much like any other business, you have to regulate, the sort of the works that you have in the studio, how it gets out, and I suppose managing yourself and how you interact with people and institutions, through just communication and allowing them into your space, your creative space, and that's just how you sell work and just keep managing your books, just like any other business, yeah. Okay.
Nwabisa, there's an element of visibility when you're collecting art or buying art. If an artist is well known, people want to buy his or her artwork more. How do you decide what you're going to buy?
Well, you need to form an opinion first. What interests you? Do you want to collect old masters? Do you want to collect contemporary? Okay. Do you want to do sculptures? Do you want to do... there's a wide range. Mm-hmm. So before you decide what you want to do, you need to first decide what do you enjoy? What piques your interest? And then you can research and so on.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's an element of what's happening in the public space informing what you do. A lot of your work is involved in land and the narrative of land, and it seems like you found a sweet spot where land is at the top of the agenda and your work deals with that.
Yeah, I mean, primarily I work from sort of what informs my personal background, and my grandparents were also farmers, and it just so coincidentally worked out that while concerned with issues of my own family background, it coincides with the politics that happen in the country, but I am quite informed by what happens socially, in our communities and and the grievances of our people. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Nwabisa, earlier on we were speaking about how there's a perception around art and that it's very elitist and it's only for perhaps a select group of people. I know that you're trying to involve more people in that and try and bring more people into being interested in art, even if they're not buying it.
I mean, you don't have to have a lot of money to start collecting art. You can start collecting art, you can start collecting prints, you can go around to exhibitions, you can develop a relationship with artists. There are a lot of emerging artists, so it doesn't necessarily mean that you must have money before you start collecting. That's why I'm saying you need to form an opinion before you start collecting. What interests you? What do you like? And then you can take it from there. So you don't have to, I mean, you can start collecting from 5,000 and then all the way up.
Even less than that?
Yeah,
Even
you
less
can.
than that.
You can.
How important is it that people engage with art, with artists such as yourselves, and with art in general?
I mean, you know, when we talk about art, we must always try to remember that it's not just, you know, objects, you know, everyday objects. It's, you know, it's part of our, you know, our culture and our history. So when we talk about engaging, we're actually talking about engaging with our own history as a community, and you know, and you know, so we sort of preserve all these little objects as memoirs, and you know, and tokens for, it's just like teaching, you know, the next generation. So and that's how we engage that, the sentiment we have with it. I think that's the value for, you know, and then we can say, I mean, these are valued artworks. So.
Outside of beauty, what do you think is the importance of art, collecting art, viewing art and engaging with it?
It's our heritage, it's our history, it's going to outlive us. So it's very important for us to collect and show interest in art and to support the artist. It's very important.
How do you then make art move away from that very strong perception of what it is? I know we were speaking about this yesterday, and how you need to start getting people like millennials that Arabile spoke about in Singapore interested in art and engaging with it quite fully.
I mean, just like you know, Mahati said earlier on, we need to destigmatize this elitism about art. You know, it's not. This is part of our community. These are stories, you know, and all these cultural practitioners are people that come from our society. So why not celebrate them? Why not engage with the works, you know?
Thanks both so much for your time. Setlamorago Mashilo, who's an artist, and Nwabisa Xayiya, who is an art collector. Now, SABC Art Collection is a rich national public treasure. Let's take a look inside the Public Broadcast Art Collection.
Whether you're talking about the great Irma Stein's Native Girl oil on canvas painting, or the famous Bongidlomo's work from the series Songs and Monuments, or the prolific William Kentridge's work, Xenowriting No. 7, the SABC has them all. Just to give an indication of the value of these three works by these internationally acclaimed South African artists, the SABC has a few famous Irma Stein works. Recently, Stein's work has set records for South African artists on international auctions. Research indicates that between 2000 and 2011, the record price for a painting by Irma Stein leapt from 1.7 million rand to roughly 34 million rand.
I'm the economics editor here at the SABC. Now I want to tell you about this Alexis Prela. Alexis Prela is one of the famous post-war Afrikaners, and they have recently enjoyed a big boom in commercial sales. A painting like this on international markets can fetch something upwards of 5 million rand. I visited an auction house called Aspire yesterday afternoon, and one of his works, in fact it is his last work, it's going on auction in Johannesburg for a whopping 4 million rand. Now the post-war Afrikaners are very distinct in that they sought to situate themselves in the African continent, departing from the art movements of Europe.
The SABC has more than 4 works by William Kentridge. The median price for a Kentridge work these days is said to be around 5 million rand.
This is the work of the late great Cecil Scottness, who lived between 1926 and 2009. Now in art, when the artist dies, the value of the work appreciates because the artist is no longer living and producing the work. This creates scarcity, and scarcity makes the price go up. Now let me tell you about another of our late great national treasures, and that's Gerald Ceccato. In this piece called Husband and Wife, Gerald Ceccato depicts the typical township scenes. He is called the poet of everyday township life. Gerald Ceccato, on recent market valuations, sells internationally for upwards of 5 million rand.
The South African Broadcasting Corporation has acquired works of art informally for more than half a century. Following the restructuring of the corporation's 1994 collection, the collection was now formalized under a curator, and funds were allocated for the acquisition of works representative of South Africa's new democracy and showcasing the soul of the South African people in all their diversity. These are public treasures, and the public broadcaster makes them available for viewing at its premises. Recently, the South African Broadcasting Corporation's leadership told Parliament that the collection's worth is approximately 400 million rand.
Art can be used as a recession-beating tool, a way to keep the wolf from the door and a way to increase your money. Susie Goodman from Strauss Art and Koulla Xinisteris from the SABC Art Collection join us in studio now. Thanks both so much for your time on SABC News. Susie, perhaps I'll start with you. How can art be used as a recession-beating measure or a way to keep the wolf from the door?
Good question. I mean, I think the exciting thing is about having an asset at home that you possibly inherited or bought 20 years ago for a small amount of money. And with the growth and development of the success of the South African art market, you suddenly discover that the artist's works climbed in escalation in value, and you can suddenly release a nice bit of cash, which is always a delight and often comes for that rainy day. Obviously, there's a little bit of a corollary to that, is that sometimes the thing that you pegged your hopes on, the artist slightly goes out of fashion, or the market gets flooded with their work, and the prices then go down, so you don't quite get as much as maybe you hoped from at the beginning. But I think it is another recession element. It's also very important that you can buy small value pieces of art which also help the artists that are out there too. So it's selling and the buying that is beneficial in the art market.
Koulla, how do you then decide which is the right piece of art to buy, which won't go out of fashion and will last and grow in value later on?
Equally a very good question, because that's the main thing for me, for any collector, any collection, is the eye behind the selection. In a domestic situation, it's different, where people might want to buy something comfortable. For a collection like the SABC, where you're echoing the socio-political, if you like, of a country, both historical and contemporary, it is the eye of the pain even. I mean, the SABC collection is actually built on the idea of predicament. So we specifically went out, not looking for those works, but they were the works that spoke the strongest. So it's unlike other collections actually in that way.
Susie, we know that there's a very good way of using art and using it to build wealth, but also there's a way of beating exchange control regulations, people buying things from overseas, coming here, trying to deal with the exchange rate. How much of that do we see here, and people trying to skirt regulations?
Almost non-existent, because I think what happens is that people buy art because they like it. I think people who are ex-South Africans who are living abroad have genuinely sought the country's art that they've grown up with and loved. I don't think it's seen, I mean, we certainly don't get involved in that side of the business at all. We get people to buy and properly export it and import it into the countries of where they're residing. If a piece of work is brought back to South Africa to sell because the value of the art will be better valued here, then that's done all through the right exchange controls and importations. I mean, that is definitely something that is done properly. I think also the thing that maybe is a point to mention here is that we're benefiting from a huge interest overseas of international collectors who are not South Africans or who have South African roots, collecting South African art, contemporary contemporary art, historical art, all of the art categories, because there's a deep interest in the African art continent and the artists that are here. And I think that's a good development.
The SABC Art Collection is said to be worth over 250 million rand, is that correct?
Yeah, it could even be a bit higher. Because you can't, it's quite difficult to earmark exactly at any one time what it is. And you've got to do a little bit of projection into the future because you're not selling it. So if we went a year ahead now, you could say a year or two ahead, you could project that it could go up. For instance, Anton van Vaux at the recent Strauss exhibition, Paul Kruger, I think it is, went for 9.2 million rand. We've got about 4 Anton van Vaux's. They were in the past evaluated at maybe 1 or 2 million. So suddenly overnight, you've got 4 times what? It brings up your figures. So we were fortunate in that we bought mainly through a lot of auctions because we only had a budget of 50,000 rand, which is nothing in the early days. So you buy a work, like Dumili Fanny was not really well recognized at the time, so a few hundred rand, a few thousand rand. Similarly, Prella, the highest paying price that the SABC ever paid was 250,000 rand, I think, for a Prella, and that Prella is what, maybe 6 million now?
Okay, good investment. Susie, very briefly as we wrap up, are you able to measure the economic health of a country or city based on how much you sell art for or how much you sell in an auction?
Yes and no. I think it's a bit more complicated than just that statement, but I think yes, I mean the health of the art economy is definitely the fact that people have got money to buy art. I think where we must often look at it is probably the middle market, which is a bracket that is not the high figures that we see in the media, but more the sort of 10, 15, 20,000 disposable income, and at times we are seeing that is an area that's been affected. Saying that, there are a lot of people who have never bought art before who are coming into the market and buying online or on the lower level, the 5,000 rand level, and I think that's exciting because as long as you start seeing new people continuously coming into the auction world, you'll see the benefit financially.
Thanks both so much for your time on SABC News. Susie Goodman from Strauss Art Co. and Koulla Xinisteris from the SABC Art Collection. She's a curator there. Thanks for your time. It's time for a short break. When we come back, we continue talking about the business of art. Do stay with us on Point.